Hello everyone, amateur meteorologist First and Weather here. It is July 25th, 2020, and we have a lot to talk about in terms of the tropics and just in general tropical activity that we could see over the next couple of weeks. And in general, it's been a really active start to the hurricane season for the Atlantic for 2020. We've already had 7 named storms and more to come. And it looks like we might have the first significant eye of the season, and this one really looks to be potentially potent. But right here we have the satellite view of Hurricane Hannah, which made landfall in southeastern Texas a few hours ago. And as you can see, we do have that eye right here still being maintained, with the majority of the convection now shifting to the eastern side, as we do have sort of that western side really being impeded by the terrain and that drier air being sucked in. So that the convection is now mostly being focused on the western and eastern, or excuse me, the eastern and southern portion of the storm, and this trend should continue, and the storm should eventually start to weaken and lose its hurricane characteristics. Right now, latest observation was surface winds at 85 miles per hour sustained, which does make it a Category 1 hurricane. It is expected, to weaken into a tropical storm very shortly, and then slowly meander southwest into Mexico. Here's the official NOAA outlook for Hurricane Hannah. As you can see, that tropical storm wind field is pretty impressive, with that hurricane wind field being very concise right around the center of the storm. And as you can see, like I said, that storm is supposed to meander slowly to the southwest before quickly weakening into a depression by the time it reaches Mexico, and then becoming essentially remnants by the time it reaches the central areas of Mexico. It will provide some pretty ample rains for these areas right here, with the primary threat, of course, being flooding, as that wind threat diminishes quite quickly as it goes inland. And now here is the Gonzalo forecast. As you might remember, I was talking about how the Gulf of Mexico does need to pay attention to the potential threat of Gonzalo. Well, here is the 5 p.m. advisory, and Gonzalo has essentially become remnants, weakening very quickly. And I think what happened was that dry air from Venezuela and the surrounding regions really got sucked into the storm and really made it difficult for it to properly develop, and quite significantly impeded its development and prevented it from becoming a stronger system and really cranking northwestward into the Cuban region, and then eventually potentially making an impact for the United States. So definitely some good news there for Latin America and also the United States. Now, if we switch gears, or rather, this is actually the satellite view of tropical storm or tropical depression Gonzalo, which is now essentially just remnants. As you can see, all of the circulation is gone. You just have a few pockets of convection and some mesoscale convective systems in Venezuela. Really, the system has just collapsed. No signs of any sort of tropical characteristics. So this system has thoroughly been weakened and is essentially over. And now, if we switch to Invest 92L, this has been getting a lot of buzz in the meteorological community, and for good reason. The models have been showing this consistently now for the past few days, and it is expected to strengthen quite significantly as we go into the next few days. And you can see that we do have those whites and black shading, indicating some very good convection going on, very nice thunderstorms in pockets. And this trend should continue as the system does become more organized and has an 80% chance of development, according to NOAA, in the next 3 days. So definitely something to pay attention to. And here is basically some analysis and my thoughts on what's going to happen with the system and the potential paths and characteristics of the system. Now, here is the ensemble model plot. Of course, this is not a forecast. This is just showing what the models are saying. And as you can see, Invest 92L is still somewhere right around here, but the model does show it finally reaching tropical characteristics, basically just due east of South America, and then slowly tracking to the northwest. And then you have 2 divergent solutions, one going directly for the southeast coast, Florida, or one diverging and off into the Atlantic as a fishhook storm. Now, it is definitely way too early to really delve into what track this is going to take, how much this is going to strengthen, but it is a good idea just to see what the models are doing, as we still are quite a few days away. Here is the European Ensemble, the EPS, and this is one thing that I think is really important to show you, and why I think that while the system may strengthen quite significantly, I don't really think it poses a major threat to the U.S. if what the models are saying is correct. If you look right here, we do have this large ridge, the Bermuda High, right around here, with essentially a dome here. And what that does is that forces Invest 92L to meander to the west and then make that northeastward turn. And the reason I think if this does strengthen, if this strengthens into a hurricane or a tropical storm, the risk as of now to the United States is not too high, and that's because the ensemble has now been showing for the past couple of days a trough moving in at the exact same time this system, if it were to develop, would reach the north or the western Atlantic Ocean. And what that trough would do is it would essentially kick that system off into the Atlantic Ocean, posing no real threat to the southeast coast. In top of that, additionally, we do have that Bermuda High here sort of retreating to the northeast. And in previous ensemble model runs, that high was much stronger, and it was much more focused to the southwest, with that dome being somewhere right here. If that was the case, that system would be forced to go more inland before being kicked out by this trough. So again, this trough is the main element here. If this trough was not here and we had sort of a ridge, that system would have no steering currents and would likely meander or move to the west and make landfall. So that trough here is really, if this is correct, again, we are still very far out and the ensemble does have potential to change, but if this trough is correct, I do think this system will likely be kicked out to sea. Again, it is too early to make a final call. This is just speculation, but if this trough really is a significant factor. And if we switch to the GEFS ensemble, the GEFS ensemble is really showing the same thing. We do have that trough over here. All right, and we have that ridge much further to the northeast. And if that is the case, this system is going to go offshore. All right, and so that is the very important element that we have to look at this forecast. And it is encouraging definitely to see both ensemble models showing that trough in place. So that really builds my confidence that there will be a trough in the eastern part of the country on July 31st. And that is exactly when the system, if it develops, will be reaching the east or western Atlantic Ocean. And here is the model forecast for its strength. As you can see, almost all of the models do have this strengthening into a hurricane, and many or some as category 1 or even category 2. Again, I think conditions are favorable for it to strengthen because of the warm ocean waters as it heads further west, and in general, the very active pattern we're seeing of tropical waves originating off of Africa. Now here are the sea surface temperature anomalies, and as you can see, right off of Africa, conditions are not too good. We do have some cooler than average waters, but as that system heads west, it's going to encounter a warm pool of Atlantic Ocean waters, and that will really help to fuel its development as it heads further west and really help it gain strength and organization as we progress through time. Another thing I want to look at is the GEFS 200 millibar velocity potential anomaly, and this essentially shows where there's rising air and where there's sinking air. And what I want you to notice is that when the system first originated, right, so we didn't really have that much sinking air over Africa. The oranges represent sinking, the greens represent rising. And so as we go through time, we can see that on July 31st, as that system heads closer, as it moves to the west, we do have a lot of sinking anomalies over the western United States. And that might impede, or not the western United States, but over the United States and the western Atlantic Ocean. And that might slightly impede its development. But in general, though, with those sinking motions not really being too powerful, I do think it won't be too big of a factor. But it is definitely something to consider as we go through time. And moving off topic a little bit right here, as we go further in time, we can see that Africa remains pretty active. We do have some greens and very active rising conditions here, especially off the eastern African coast, and that might translate to the west as we go through time. So it is definitely possible we see a very active period of tropical waves originating from Africa and moving to the west. Definitely a certain possibility. And this is indicated here. You can see that moving west. Look at the west coast of Africa on August 4th. We have a huge area of just rising air, and this is going to really promote a bunch of tropical waves to move off the west coast of Africa and make their way into the Atlantic Ocean. And this is really a time period to watch. I think August 1st through basically the first week of August is when we could really see some big systems develop because of this constant rising air, really helping to support the development of tropical systems over the Atlantic Ocean. As we go through time, this actually continues, and it's not until August 7th we finally have those rising motions starting to decrease. So definitely something to pay attention to. I do think the first week of August could be quite significant in the tropical storm and basically the tropical season activity as we go through time. So definitely something to pay attention to. And now here is the GEFS ensemble 200 millibar to 850 millibar wind shear over the next few days. And as you can see, this is valid for 12Z Wednesday, July 29th, as we go through time. So Invest 92L is somewhere around here, all right, in this region. And you can see that wind shear is really not that bad. The GEFS ensemble has Gonzalo right here, picking it up, and then moving inland. This is what I disagree with. So with that trough really being in place, right here, you can see those really strong wind shear anomalies right here, this big jet streak. With that being in place, I just don't see this system going inland. Again, I might be wrong, but with that trough, historically speaking, we almost always have this system moving to the northeast. Now, one wild card factor that might affect my forecast is the presence of an upper level low right here, a closed upper level low that the GEFS ensemble is predicting for during the time this system comes in. Again, the GEFS ensemble, the GFS in general, have a horrible track record with these type of things this far out. But if that's the case, that upper level low will help to keep that system going westward before being finally forced to make that northeast return from this trough right here. So that is the wild card. If this upper level low would happen to verify, this system would have a greater chance of making a direct impact on the eastern United States. Again, this is very uncertain. Right now I do think that this trough is a relative certainty, but this upper level low is really a question as to whether this will be in place, where it's going to be exactly. And so right now I think if that upper level low is indeed there is a greater chance, and it is going to take longer for that system to curve out. Regardless, I think it eventually will curve out like this, so the chance of it going into the Gulf of Mexico is really low. But if this upper level low were to be there, this system would eventually track into the southeastern states of North Carolina or South Carolina or Florida somewhere and go slightly inland before making its northeast return. So that, again, is the question. I think we'll get a better idea of that as we go through time. But as you can see, wind shear, really not too much of a problem. This is really just associated with the system that it's picking up, but across the entire Atlantic, really nothing impeding the development of the storm. And so that, again, is another case for why this system really could develop into something potentially strong. But the question is whether it will impact the United States or Caribbean. Now, one thing I want to move on to is the NAM 12 kilometer, just go into the short term a little bit. As you can see, we do have a pretty nice substantial ridge over the Great Lakes region, and that is going to help to keep things quite quiet over the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Mississippi region, and even the upper south, the deep southeastern states. And that's because we're going to have these sinking motions with temperatures being seasonably warm to slightly above average. And as you can see right here, we do have a trough coming in. So the main storminess over the next few days is going to be in these regions right here, as that trough does make its way further east. So I think conditions over the eastern part of the country or eastern third of the country will be relatively quiet for the next 3 or 4 days. Now, as we go through time, we can see that trough does make its way eastward. That high does remain quite stubborn. So, that, again, the main area of storminess will be in this area right here, not really on the eastern coast. And then finally, that high gets pushed out, and that's why I think at the end of the period, we could have a pretty significant storm day, or days, excuse me, for the eastern part of the country, as that trough does make its way eastward, especially in the Mid-Atlantic, Southeast, and I-95 corridor, where we could see some pretty good storms and some unsettled weather. And this is essentially quite needed, because the next few days could be quite dry, which is only going to exacerbate the drought that we're seeing in the Northeast and Ohio Valley, and even the Southeast. We're starting to see these moderate drought values pop up, something which we were not seeing just 1 week ago. So that is pretty concerning. In the summer, it is really easy to get drought or a flash drought really quickly when you see these really warm temperatures and very little pop-up thunderstorms to help balance those unusually warm temperatures. And as you might know, the past 3 weeks have been unseasonably warm for basically everywhere east of the Mississippi. For example, Washington, D.C. has had about 25 90-degree days in July, or 23. So very warm in general, with temperature anomalies running 3 to even 5 degrees above average in spots. So definitely drought conditions are developing, and they might continue for the next few days, with that stubborn ridge being stuck over the Great Lakes region. So it is quite instrumental that we do see that ridge finally being broken down, and that trough coming in, delivering those unstable and unsettled conditions at the end of the week. And now here is a CFS V2 preset temperature anomaly forecast. As you can see, we do have some pretty significant drought in the Four Corners region, the western part of the country. And the CFS is forecasting a pretty wet period, especially for the Four Corners region, and even western portions of the country. As we go through week 1, week 2, we can see some really wet and unsettled conditions being forecasted. So that is some good news for people that are looking for some relief, especially in the western region of the country. Now here is the NOAA forecast. As you can see, after that CFS forecast, and even in complete contradiction, the National Weather Service is showing well below average precip for the Four Corners region, and for the next 2-3 weeks even. So again, it's interesting to see this model and forecast disparity. I'll be uploading a couple of videos in the future about the drought conditions in the West and what the pattern is looking like for them. But as of now, the next few days do look quite wet for the Four Corners region, as that trough does swing through in the western portion of the country. So some temporary good news, but I am concerned that after that, we will see conditions more favorable for rain in the east, with drier conditions prevailing in the west. And as we look to the European ensemble anomalies forecast, you can see that it does show rather a mix of rain or above average and below average temperatures. And here you can see that pocket of below average temperatures coming in at the end of the month. And again, this is indicative of that ridge here and that trough here. And that is essential, because that is when Invest 92L will be approaching the United States. And that trough, again, is going to be instrumental in kicking this out to shore. And the wildcard factor, like I said before, is that upper level low. Will it be present? If it is, I think there is a greater chance that this could go inland and then swing back out. If it's not there, I think this will likely go out to sea. So I'm going to leave you at that, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'll be making future videos on Invest 92L and the general pattern in general, over the next few days and weeks. And I'll see you guys next time.